Let's begin with the foundations. Ceuta. I am Professor Alexei, your guide through the intricacies of Ceuta today.
Hello, I'm Priyanka, here to explore this fascinating topic with you.
To frame our discussion, Ceuta is a Spanish autonomous city on the African mainland at the lip of the Strait of Gibraltar. That is to say, it is a small peninsula that functions like a door hinge between the Atlantic and the Mediterranean, Europe and Africa. If you will, imagine a very sturdy doorstop that both passages must squeeze past. Ships, migratory birds, armies, and at times desperate people all funnel through this gate. In simpler terms, control the hinge, influence the door.
Maybe the best place to begin is by asking a simple question. When we say strait and pillars, what exactly do we mean in geographic terms?
It's important to understand the terminology. The Strait of Gibraltar is the narrow waterway connecting the Atlantic Ocean to the Mediterranean Sea. Classical authors dubbed the flanking headlands the Pillars of Hercules. The northern pillar is Gibraltar itself. The southern pillar is debated between Monte Acho at Ceuta and Jebel Musa just across the water. Ceuta is furthermore an enclave of Spain on the African mainland, a special territory of the European Union with a low-tax regime, and historically a palimpsest of occupations. Phoenician outpost, Roman colony named Septem, Islamic Ceuta, Portuguese fortress after 1415, and Spanish city after 1668.
So, I guess we can start by thinking about why this matters now. Is Ceuta still a hinge in 21st century politics?
Clearly, in the present, Ceuta sits at the center of migration debates, Spain-Morocco relations, and the European Union's external border management. It is also a logistical node. Ferries link it to Algeciras. A heliport connects it to mainland Spain, and its port underpins an economy designed around a special low-tax regime. Historically, actors misunderstood or perhaps underestimated that the real value of a coastal stronghold depends on its linkages inland. Portugal learned after 1415 that without Tangier and trans-Saharan connectors, Ceuta was strategically exposed and fiscally burdensome. This misapprehension shaped Iberian strategy and even nudged Atlantic exploration priorities.
Building on that, can we ground listeners with some quick facts before the long history begins?
Of course, Spanish is the official language, and Darija Arabic is widely spoken. Estimates in recent years suggest roughly 60% Spanish first language and about 40% Arabic, with a small Sindhi-speaking community linked to trading diasporas. The population hovers in the low 80,000s. The religious landscape is plural. Spanish Christians and Arab Muslims predominate, alongside Sephardic Jews and Sindhi Hindus. Since 2010, Eid al-Adha is an official public holiday. The flag is a delightful anachronism, visually identical to Lisbon's, centered with a Portuguese-style shield, a heraldic fossil of 1415. Ecologically, the peninsula is an important bird area. Raptors and storks concentrate over Ceuta in spring and autumn, riding thermals as if queuing for an aerial passport control.
To shift gears a bit, can you sketch the long arc from ancient to modern? Just the essentials.
Let's start with the history. In the early first millennium BC, Phoenicians selected the La Almina Isthmus for its defensibility and its command of the strait. Rome later made Septem a colony within Mauritania Tingitana. By the late 4th century, it was Christianized and Latin-speaking. Vandal and then Byzantine episodes left a coastal outpost that leaned culturally toward Iberia. Under Islam, Ceuta rose and fell with Berber dynasties, Almoravids and Almohads among them, The city's fortunes were tethered to wider Maghrebi politics and Iberian trade. The decisive early modern turn came on 21-22 August 1415, when King John I of Portugal seized Ceuta in a lightning assault, reportedly with astonishingly few casualties. It became Portugal's first permanent straight foothold. After the Iberian Union and Portugal's restoration, Ceuta uniquely chose to remain with Spain. The Treaty of Lisbon of 1668 formalized the transfer. Morocco's Moulay Ismail then pressed a decades-long siege from 1694 to 1727. Spanish identity consolidated under that pressure. In the 19th century, disputes at the frontier fed into the Hispano-Moroccan War. In the 20th, Ceuta was an Army of Africa bastion in 1936. Later, Spain retained it when recognizing Moroccan independence in 1956. Democratic autonomy arrived in 1995 under a Statute of Autonomy. In the 21st century, cross-border shocks, including large-scale irregular crossings in 2021 and at a much larger reported scale, 2026, have tested crisis management and Spain-Morocco coordination.
Actually, before we go too deep, I want to ask something simple first. What draws you, personally, to this tiny place with very large consequences?
In this context, I confess to a fascination with geometry. A narrow isthmus, two commanding hills, Monte Hacho and Añera, and a moat cut into stone. One can read the city like a theorem in fortification. Strategically, Ceuta is a chessboard corner square. Occupying it rarely checkmates an adversary by itself, but it constrains every subsequent move. That interplay between terrain and policy is, to my mind, the distilled essence of geopolitics. This brings us to our first big question. Historically, what led to the long-lasting control struggles over Ceuta? The answer essentially is layered geography. First, choke points concentrate value. Whoever controls provisioning, signaling, and interdiction at the strait shapes maritime trade and naval passage. Second, hinterlands matter. In the 15th century, the profit lay not in Ceuta's markets alone, but in the trans-Saharan gold and slave routes terminating at ports like Tangier, hence Portugal's 1437 gamble. Third, legitimacy is cumulative. Ceuta accrued symbolic capital, pillars of Hercules lore, a cathedral over a former mosque over a Byzantine church, that rulers sought to claim. Finally, technology shifted the calculus. From oared galleys to artillery bastions to modern coastguards, each era found fresh uses for the same promontory.
I'm curious about the political actors. Who pushed the hardest, and when did the balance really tip?
We observed distinct phases. Under King John I of Portugal, and figures like Pedro de Meneses and Henry the Navigator, the early 15th century saw consolidation by fortification and sea control. After 1580, the Iberian Union knitted Ceuta to Andalusian supply lines. Then in 1640, uniquely, Ceuta aligned with Spain rather than rejoin Portugal. The Treaty of Lisbon in 1668 fixed sovereignty, but not peace. Moulay Ismail's Morocco invested immense energy in a prolonged siege, alternating bombardment with attrition. Spain responded by thickening bastions and exploiting naval lanes to Cadiz and beyond. Over decades, the demographic center of gravity shifted decisively Spanish. By the 18th century, Ceuta was locked into Spain's defensive architecture of the strait.
And what about ordinary people, the residents who live through these transitions? How are they affected, socially and culturally?
To elaborate, siege conditions are demographically selective. Garrisons attract soldiers, artisans, clerics, and suppliers aligned with the ruling power. Over the long Moroccan siege, Spanish-speaking and Catholic institutions intensified. The diocese shifted from Lisbon's orbit to Seville's. Yet Ceuta also retained plural communities. Muslims in nearby hinterlands and within the city, later Sephardic Jewish families. And by the late 19th and mid-20th centuries, South Asian traders including Sindhi Hindus. In the present, bilingualism is widespread, and civic recognition of Muslim holidays sits alongside Catholic festivals. The built environment, cathedral, mosques, synagogues, temples, attest to continuity through change. Let's transition to another aspect, a counterfactual. What if Portugal had not retained Ceuta after the failed 1437 Tangier campaign and had honored the promise to return it? Theoretically, Portugal would have shed a costly exposed outpost and reallocated resources to the Atlantic vector already emerging, Madeira and the Azores consolidation, then the West African littoral, Arguin, Elmina, and eventually the Cape route. Without Ceuta's garrison drain, the court might have accelerated investment in maritime cartography and shipyards. Conversely, it would have forfeited a straight listening post and a bargaining chip in Maghrebi politics.
What if we thought about it like this? Would abandoning Ceuta have pushed Portugal to bypass North African trade even earlier, going straight to gold and pepper by sea?
Arguably, yes. The strategic logic already favored maritime circumvention of Saharan intermediaries. Prince Henry's circle collected winds and currents like merchants collect coins. Without the prestige and sunk costs of Ceuta, the opportunity cost of failure at Tangier would have been lower. Pressure to demonstrate returns at sea might have increased. We can infer a marginal acceleration in establishing fortified factories on the Gulf of Guinea. Elmina's role as a gold re-export node could have grown even sooner. On the other hand, relinquishing Ceuta might have emboldened Marinid or Wattasid rivals, and complicated later attempts at Tangier or Asila. Portuguese diplomacy in the strait would have had less leverage. The broad arc of oceanic expansion likely endures. The tempo and the messaging at court change.
Can we say that the Atlantic islands and Andalusian ports would have replaced Ceuta's role as staging points? Or does a straight foothold do something unique you cannot easily swap out?
In simpler terms, some functions are fungible, others are not. Madeira and the Azores are superb for oceanic staging, provisioning, and meteorological learning. Cadiz and Huelva offer dockyards and commerce. What they cannot replicate is the proximate surveillance and interdiction of traffic through the Strait of Gibraltar, nor the immediate political signaling to Maghrebi rulers. So, without Ceuta, Portugal trades a symbolically potent, logistically thorny sentinel for a cleaner Atlantic strategy. That swap likely improves financial efficiency while weakening strait leverage. Spain's later dominance of the northern strait approaches becomes even more pronounced. On to our next point, the present day. How does the sovereignty dispute affect Ceuta's residents now? Formally, Spain treats Ceuta as an integral part of the state with autonomous city status since 1995. Morocco frames Ceuta, Melilla, and the Plazas de Soberanía as occupied territories within a decolonization narrative. Daily life, however, is structured by practicalities. Border crossings near Fnidek and Benzou channel trade and family ties. The civil guard and city police manage security and order. The port, retail centers, and a low-tax regime sustain livelihoods. In moments of diplomatic friction, these arteries constrict. In 2007, a royal visit drew protests. In 2020, rhetoric about sovereignty spiked. In 2021, and again at a much larger reported scale in 2026, Irregular crossings stressed reception systems and required intense Spain-Morocco coordination. Figures in fast-moving situations are often contested. What is not contested is the human and administrative strain of such surges.
Isn't it interesting how identity can be both local and geopolitical? How do residents navigate being European by law, African by geography, and culturally bilingual? Does it create tension or resilience?
It is worth noting that identity here is often a both-and proposition. Many residents express Spanish civic identity and EU belonging while living bilingual multi-faith lives. Official recognition of Eid al-Adha alongside Catholic feasts is institutionally significant. Community organizations, schools, and the University Hospital of Ceuta operate within Spanish and EU frameworks, while daily commerce and kinship radiate into northern Morocco. Tensions do surface over border wait times, labor conditions for porteadoras, or moments of diplomatic chill. But the long record suggests a practiced resilience. The city has, after all, weathered centuries of sieges, both literal and metaphorical.
Building on that, what about security guarantees? Is Ceuta clearly covered by NATO, or is it more of a political decision each time?
Mathematically speaking, if we may borrow the habit, the treaty text is bounded by geography. Article 6's wording leaves ambiguity for North African territories. At NATO's Madrid summit in 2022, the Secretary General emphasized that the alliance protects all allies, and that invoking Article 5 is always a political decision. Thus, Ceuta's security rests on layered guarantees. Spain's armed forces, including a permanent garrison with combined arms capabilities, EU law and border mechanisms, and alliance solidarity, which, while strong in practice, remains untested in a Ceuta-specific case. To summarize, Ceuta is a tiny city with oversized consequences, a natural fortress at a maritime bottleneck, a ledger of Phoenician to Portuguese to Spanish layers, and a living laboratory of bilingual, multi-faith coexistence. We asked 3 questions. Why the control struggles? Because choke points, hinterlands, symbols, and technology converge. What if Portugal had let Ceuta go? Likely a cleaner Atlantic strategy with less straight leverage. And how sovereignty debates affect residents today, through border management, identity negotiations, and layered security politics. For further study, consider Melilla, Ceuta's sibling on the Moroccan coast. Parallels illuminate, differences instruct.
Thank you, Professor.
In conclusion, I encourage you to continue your exploration of such fascinating topics. Goodbye.